Marcus had always dreamed of giving his family more than just a house. He wanted a home, a place where his children could run in the yard, where his wife could finally plant her garden, and where every brick carried the weight of sacrifice and hard work. After years of saving and climbing his way up from nothing, he finally bought a home in what seemed like the perfect neighborhood. The house stood tall with a freshly painted porch, its lawn neatly trimmed, and a sense of hope radiating from every window. To Marcus, it was more than property. It was proof that despite the obstacles he had faced, despite being told he didn't belong in places like this, he had made it. His children laughed as they explored their new rooms, already imagining sleepovers and birthday parties. His wife, Jasmine, looked at him with tears in her eyes, whispering, "We did it." But dreams don't always sit quietly. Sometimes they attract storms. The storm came in the form of a woman named Karen. She lived 2 houses down, her eyes always scanning, her voice always correcting, her clipboard always ready. In the HOA, she wasn't just another member, she was the self-appointed queen. And in her mind, Marcus's arrival was an intrusion. The very first day Marcus moved in, Karen stood on her lawn, arms crossed, watching every box carried through the front door. Her lips tightened, her head shook slowly, as if she were already tallying up infractions. By evening, she approached. "Excuse me," she said curtly. "Your moving truck has been parked here far longer than HOA rules allow. You'll need to pay a fine." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, we're just unloading today. I'll have it gone soon." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules. You will learn them if you want to live here." That was their first conversation. But it wouldn't be their last. Over the next week, Karen left 3 written notices in Marcus's mailbox, one about his grass being too long, another about his mailbox not being HOA approved, and a third about the color of his front door. Marcus, who had chosen a tasteful shade of deep blue, was told it clashed with the neighborhood palette. Jasmine urged him not to argue. "Let it go, Marcus. We'll handle it." But Marcus could feel it in his bones, this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about grass or paint. It was about something else, something uglier. Every time Karen walked past their house, she stared just a little too long, her eyes cold, her disapproval loud even in silence. Marcus realized that in her world, their presence in this neighborhood was the real violation. The house still stood, strong and full of promise. But for the first time, Marcus felt a shadow fall across it. And in that shadow, trouble was already beginning to grow. The next morning, Marcus walked outside with a cup of coffee in hand, trying to breathe in the peace of his new life. For a moment, the air was calm, the sound of birds, the quiet of suburban streets, the promise of a fresh start. But then he saw it. Another letter. Folded neatly in an envelope marked HOA notice, it sat in his mailbox like a curse waiting to be read. With a sigh, Marcus opened it. Violation number 004, lawn exceeds maximum HOA length requirements. Immediate trimming required. Fine, $100. Marcus looked at his yard. The grass was barely over 2 inches. Freshly mowed just days ago. It was immaculate. Yet here it was, another violation. Another strike. Another warning that this wasn't going to stop. Jasmine joined him on the porch, holding their youngest on her hip. "Another one?" she asked, her voice tired already. "Yeah," Marcus muttered. "This time it's the grass." Her eyes softened. "Marcus, they don't care about the grass. You know that." He did. Deep down, he knew exactly what this was. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. She had found the perfect shield for her hate, the HOA handbook. Within a week, more notices arrived. One claimed their garbage cans had been left out too long, though Marcus had rolled them in before sunset. Another complained that the basketball hoop in the driveway was unsightly, even though half the families on the street had one. Every violation came with a fine, and every fine felt like a message, "You don't belong here." Marcus tried reasoning with Karen once. He caught her outside trimming her rose bushes and approached calmly. "Look, Karen," he began, "I want to follow the rules. But some of these notices." She cut him off with a sharp laugh. "The rules aren't the problem, Marcus. You are." Her voice was quiet, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. Marcus froze, stunned at the bluntness. Karen leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You can buy a house here," she whispered, "but you'll never really be part of this neighborhood." Then, without another word, she turned back to her roses, pruning with the same cold precision she used to cut into his life. That night, Marcus sat at the dining table surrounded by the stack of violations. He held one in his hands, crumpling it slowly. "If she thinks she can push us out," he said to Jasmine, his jaw tight, "she's wrong." But Jasmine looked at him with worry in her eyes. "Marcus, people like her, they don't stop. They just find new ways." Marcus wanted to believe he could fight back with patience, with fairness, with dignity. But as the weeks passed, Karen's campaign only grew louder, harsher, and more relentless. The house, once filled with laughter and excitement, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Every knock on the door, every walk to the mailbox, every glance out the window brought with it the possibility of another attack. Marcus didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't satisfied with fines and warnings. No, she was only warming up. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern only grew worse. Marcus couldn't step outside without feeling Karen's eyes burning into him from across the street. She no longer hid her disapproval, her glare followed him like a shadow. The violations kept piling up. By now, Marcus had received notices for his children's bikes being left on the porch, for Jasmine's flower pots not matching neighborhood standards, even for his cars supposedly being parked at a slight angle in the driveway. Each one came with a fine, and each fine added fuel to the fire Karen was determined to spread. But the HOA notices were no longer her only weapon. She had begun something more personal, something far more dangerous. One evening, Marcus returned home from work to find the word "leave" scratched into his mailbox with a sharp object. His heart sank as he stared at the deep grooves carved into the metal. Jasmine rushed outside after hearing the slam of the mailbox door. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Who would do that?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew. Still, without proof, what could he say? Karen was careful, too careful. She had built her war around technicalities and petty rules, ensuring Marcus looked like the troublemaker if he fought back. But Karen wasn't just trying to fine him into silence anymore. She was escalating. Late at night, Marcus began hearing strange knocks at the door. Sometimes it was just one, sharp and deliberate, at 2 in the morning. Other times it was 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like someone trying to rattle his nerves. Each time he rushed to the door, nobody was there. Just the empty street, still and silent, as though the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Jasmine started jumping at every sound. Their children, once excited about the house, grew uneasy. Their son asked one night, "Dad, why does that lady always stare at us?" Marcus didn't know how to answer. Things finally reached a breaking point when Marcus caught Karen in the act. He had installed a small camera above the garage after the mailbox incident. One morning, he checked the footage and froze. There she was, Karen, walking up their driveway in the dead of night. She wasn't delivering a notice. She wasn't picking up after a dog. She was pouring something. A thin, dark liquid along the edge of his garage door. And then she vanished back into the shadows. Marcus's chest tightened as he replayed the footage. Gasoline. It had to be. He rushed to Jasmine, his voice trembling with both fear and rage. "She's not just trying to push us out, Jazz. She's planning something." For the first time, Marcus realized this wasn't about fines or notices anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about hate, raw, festering, unrestrained hate. And if Karen was willing to cross this line, how far would she go? The morning after Marcus discovered the camera footage, he couldn't shake the dread crawling up his spine. He replayed it again and again, watching Karen's silhouette move like a ghost across his driveway. Each time, his stomach tightened a little more. He thought about taking it straight to the police, but a voice in his head whispered, "What if they don't believe you? What if they think you're exaggerating?" He'd seen it before. Without a direct act of damage, without undeniable evidence, they might call it circumstantial. So Marcus kept the footage, waiting, watching. But Karen didn't stop. That evening, Marcus found a note taped to his front door. The handwriting was messy, scrawled in thick black marker. "Get out before the fire starts." Marcus's hands trembled as he held it. Jasmine gasped when she read it, clutching his arm. "This isn't just harassment anymore, Marcus. This is a threat." He nodded, jaw tight. "Yeah. And if she thinks I'm going to run, she doesn't know me." But deep down, Marcus wasn't sure. He wasn't afraid for himself, he was afraid for Jasmine, for the kids. What kind of person threatens fire? The following nights only added to the terror. Strange sounds echoed outside the house. Once, Marcus woke to the faint smell of smoke, but when he searched the yard, nothing was burning. Another night, the children's swing set was overturned, left lying like broken bones in the yard. Then came the whispers. At first, Marcus thought he imagined it. A faint voice outside his bedroom window, low and taunting. He pressed his ear to the glass. A woman's voice. "You don't belong here." Marcus ripped the curtains open, but the yard was empty. Still, the words lingered in his head, chilling him to his core. Jasmine grew restless, barely sleeping. The kids started begging to sleep in their parents' room. Marcus tried to keep them calm, but even he couldn't hide the growing cracks in his resolve. Finally, Marcus decided to confront her directly. One Saturday morning, he marched across the street and knocked firmly on Karen's door. She opened it with a smile far too sweet to be sincere. "Marcus," she said in mock surprise. "What a pleasure." His fists clenched. "Cut the games, Karen. I've got footage. I know what you're doing." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but her smirk never faded. "Footage? Oh, I'm sure the HOA would just love to see your little accusations. But you see, Marcus," she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No one's going to believe you. You're just the angry outsider. I'm the one protecting this neighborhood." She shut the door in his face, leaving Marcus seething. As he stood there, his phone buzzed. A text message. No number, just blocked. "You can't stop what's coming." Marcus stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The threats weren't empty. They were promises. And he knew something terrible was on its way. The night it happened began like any other. Jasmine tucked the children into bed, reading them a story to soothe their nerves. Marcus double-checked every lock, every window, every corner of the house. The fear had become routine, an invisible weight pressing down on the family every evening. By midnight, the neighborhood was silent. Only the hum of cicadas filled the air. Marcus sat awake in the living room, unable to sleep. His mind replayed Karen's threats, her words slithering in his ears, "You can't stop what's coming." He finally dozed off on the couch, exhaustion pulling him under. Then came the smell. At first, it was faint, drifting into his dreams like a distant campfire. But within minutes, the sharp sting of smoke clawed at his throat. Marcus jolted awake, coughing. His eyes darted around the room, thin wisps of smoke curled from under the front door. "Jasmine," he shouted, his voice raw. She appeared at the top of the stairs, panic already on her face. Behind her, the kids stirred, woken by the commotion. Marcus ran to the door and flung it open. Flames roared against the porch, climbing hungrily up the siding of the house. Heat slapped him in the face, forcing him back. The fire wasn't random, it had been poured, fed, ignited. This was no accident. "Out the back. Now!" Marcus yelled. He grabbed a wet towel from the kitchen, pressing it to his mouth, then dashed upstairs. Smoke was thickening, stinging his eyes, burning his lungs. He scooped his youngest child into his arms while Jasmine clutched the other's hand, leading them toward the back door. But the fire was spreading fast, too fast. The walls crackled and popped as paint blistered from the heat. The sound was deafening, like the roar of a freight train. Marcus kicked open the back door, stumbling into the night. Cool air rushed over him as the children coughed and cried. Jasmine pulled them across the yard, away from the inferno. Marcus turned back, his chest heaving, as flames swallowed the house he had built with his own hands. Neighbors emerged from their homes, some shouting, some frozen in disbelief. And there, across the street, stood Karen. She was barefoot, wrapped in a robe, holding a mug of coffee as though she had simply woken to the chaos. But Marcus saw it, the faint, satisfied curl of her lips as his world burned. Fire trucks arrived minutes later, but by then it was too late. The home was gone, reduced to a skeletal frame glowing red against the night sky. Marcus held his children close, rage and grief colliding inside him. Jasmine sobbed quietly, her face buried in his shoulder. The firefighters worked tirelessly, but Marcus's eyes never left Karen. Even as hoses blasted water onto the flames, even as smoke rose like a funeral shroud, she never looked away from him. For Marcus, the message was clear: she wanted him destroyed. But what Karen didn't know was that fire might consume a house, but it could also ignite a fight for justice. The fire smoldered long into the early morning hours. By the time the last flames were extinguished, Marcus's house was nothing more than blackened timber and collapsed beams. The smell of char hung heavy in the air, bitter and suffocating. Marcus stood wrapped in a blanket given by paramedics, but the heat of rage inside him burned hotter than any fire. Jasmine sat with the children, their tear-streaked faces pressed into her arms. Neighbors whispered in clusters, some murmuring words of sympathy, others exchanging uneasy glances. Then came the investigators. 2 fire marshals stepped onto the property, their flashlights sweeping across the wreckage. One crouched near the porch, running a gloved hand over the scorched wood. He exchanged a look with his partner and scribbled notes. Marcus's patience snapped. He approached them, voice hoarse from smoke but steady with conviction. "This wasn't an accident," he said firmly. "Someone set this. Someone poured fuel and lit it." The older marshal looked up, expression guarded. "Sir, I understand your frustration. But we have to run a full analysis before drawing conclusions. Fires, they're complicated." Marcus clenched his fists. "I know who did it." His eyes flicked across the street, to where Karen still stood among the gawkers, arms folded like she was watching a show. The marshal followed his gaze. "Her?" "Yes," Marcus said without hesitation. "She's been threatening us for weeks. I have notes. I have footage of her trespassing. I have proof." The younger investigator raised an eyebrow but didn't dismiss him. "If you've got evidence, save it. We'll need it." Marcus nodded, though frustration churned in his chest. He knew how these things went. Sometimes evidence got lost in the noise, sometimes it wasn't enough. But this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. As dawn broke, police arrived to take statements. An officer pulled Marcus aside, pen ready. "Do you have any reason to believe someone targeted your family?" Marcus gave a humorless laugh. "Reason? She left notes. Threatened to burn us out. You want motive?" "It's because we don't fit her picture-perfect neighborhood." The officer hesitated, jotting it down. "All right. We'll follow up." But when Marcus glanced across the yard, his stomach twisted. Karen was already speaking with another officer, her face twisted in mock horror. She gestured toward the ruins of his home as though she were the victim, as though she were grieving. Her crocodile tears fooled some neighbors, who patted her arm and nodded sympathetically. Jasmine noticed too. "Marcus," she whispered, clutching his sleeve. "She's spinning this already. She's turning it around. "I know," he muttered, jaw set like stone. "But let her talk. Let her lie. Because once I hand over what I've got, the truth will burn hotter than any fire she lit." The marshals taped off the wreckage, and the crowd began to disperse. Karen lingered for just a moment longer, meeting Marcus's eyes with that same smug smile. Then she turned, walking back to her untouched home as if nothing had happened. For Marcus, it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was war. The courthouse smelled of old paper, disinfectant, and anxiety. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table in a borrowed suit, his shoulders squared but his hands restless on the wooden surface. Beside him, his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rochelle, organized a neat stack of files and photographs. This wasn't just a case about fire damage. It was about truth, justice, and survival. For Marcus, it was about reclaiming the dignity Karen had tried to strip from him. The bailiff called order, and the judge entered, robes sweeping as the room rose. Marcus's heart thundered in his chest. He had spent weeks reliving the fire, recounting every moment, watching investigators comb through what little evidence the flames had left. But this was the day the lies unraveled. Then the door opened. Karen walked in. The room seemed to shift with her presence. She wore a crisp beige suit, hair pinned neatly, makeup immaculate. She carried herself like a victim, eyes glassy with rehearsed sorrow, lips pressed into a delicate tremble. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Some neighbors were there, curious, waiting to see how the drama they whispered about at barbecues and HOA meetings would play out in a court of law. Karen took her seat at the defendant's table, lifting her chin as though the outcome was already in her favor. She even offered Marcus a fleeting smile, that same smug expression he'd seen across the street while his home burned. Marcus's jaw tightened, but Rochelle placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Patience," she whispered. "Let her hang herself with her own words." The opening statements began. Karen's lawyer painted her as a misunderstood woman, a neighbor unfairly targeted by rumors. He spoke of how tragic it was that Marcus's home had burned, but suggested the fire was electrical, inevitable, tragic, but not criminal. Karen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue at all the right moments. Marcus's stomach turned. He could feel the narrative shifting, could sense the dangerous charisma she wielded like a weapon. Then Rochelle stood. Her voice was calm, deliberate. She didn't argue emotion, she laid out facts. She produced copies of the notes Karen had left. "Go back where you belong," scrawled in jagged ink. "You'll regret staying here." Gasoline residue found near the porch. Security camera footage of Karen lingering near Marcus's yard late at night, her face lit faintly by a street lamp. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. The gallery shifted uneasily. Neighbors who once nodded politely at Karen now leaned away from her, their gazes sharp with suspicion. And then came the witness. A teenager from down the street took the stand, hands trembling, but voice clear. He testified he'd seen Karen near Marcus's house the night of the fire, carrying a red container. He had been too scared to speak up before, but the flames, the fear, the guilt had finally driven him forward. Karen's face drained of color. Marcus watched, breath held, as her lawyer tried to recover, tried to spin excuses. But the cracks had split wide open. For the first time, Karen looked unsettled, not smug, not superior, but cornered. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving hers. She had walked into that courtroom thinking she could twist reality. But here, under oath, the truth was untangling her lies thread by thread. And Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Karen had always relied on control. In HOA meetings, she controlled the conversation. In the neighborhood, she controlled the gossip. Even in Marcus's life, she had tried to control his every move, dictating what he could and couldn't do with his own home. But in the courtroom, for the first time, that grip began to slip. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Whitfield, the evidence presented against you is serious. These letters, this footage, and eyewitness testimony suggest premeditation. Do you have a response?" Karen rose slowly, clutching her tissue like a lifeline. She forced a trembling smile, the kind she had perfected over years of performance. Your Honor, this is a terrible misunderstanding. I cared about our neighborhood. I cared about its safety. Mr. Johnson, she gestured toward Marcus with a theatrical flourish, he and his family have always misunderstood me. I never wanted harm. If anything, I tried to protect our community from disorder. Her words hung heavy, laced with the poison of prejudice she tried to mask as concern. Marcus's lawyer raised an eyebrow, but said nothing yet. The silence let Karen's words linger just long enough for the ugliness underneath them to shine through. The judge's expression hardened. Protecting your community does not justify harassment, Ms. Whitfield. And certainly not arson. Karen's composure cracked. Arson? Her voice pitched higher. You're going to believe him over me? He's lived there barely 2 years. I've served on that HOA board for 15. Everyone here knows me. Everyone knows I built that neighborhood's reputation. Why would I destroy it? The gallery stirred. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, their faces reflecting a dawning realization they had known her too well. They'd seen the subtle digs, the veiled threats, the way she smiled while cutting others down. Now, under pressure, the mask was slipping, and the woman beneath wasn't the hero of the neighborhood she claimed to be. Rochelle stood, her calm presence a stark contrast to Karen's unraveling. Your Honor, may I? At the judge's nod, Rochelle approached the screen where video evidence was cued. With a single click, grainy footage flickered to life, Karen walking across Marcus's driveway at 2:17 a.m., the outline of a red canister in her hand. The faint glow of a lighter snapped once, twice, before she disappeared off-screen. Minutes later, the footage caught the first flickers of flame. The room went dead silent. Karen's breath hitched audibly. That could be anyone. The footage is blurry. Rochelle tilted her head. And yet the jury will notice how that anyone wears the same coat you're wearing in your official HOA portrait, the one you posted on the neighborhood bulletin board. A low murmur ran through the gallery. Neighbors who once defended Karen now whispered, shaking their heads. One elderly man muttered, I knew she was trouble. Another woman folded her arms and glared at her former ally. Karen slammed her hands against the table. You're all blind. This is a setup. He wanted this to happen. He wanted to play the victim. And now you're all falling for it. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Enough, Ms. Whitfield. Karen froze, her chest heaving, her face blotched with anger. For the first time, her voice failed her. The power she once wielded over her neighbors, the smug superiority she carried like a crown, gone. In its place was the raw, desperate fear of a woman who realized the walls were closing in. Marcus sat still, watching, his expression unreadable. But inside, he felt a shift. For months, he had been the one under fire, literally, figuratively. Now, the flames had turned on her. And Karen? She was burning. The air in the courtroom felt electric, charged with tension as if every soul inside was holding its breath. For Marcus, time slowed. He sat with his hands folded tightly, staring straight ahead at the judge. He'd come too far, lost too much, to let his nerves betray him now. Karen sat across the room, a shadow of the woman she had been at the start of the trial. Her once perfect hair now looked frazzled, her lipstick smudged, her face tight with exhaustion. Her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, but Karen stared blankly at the table, her jaw clenched. The jury filed back into the room. 12 men and women, strangers bound by duty, their expressions solemn as they took their seats. The foreman, a tall man with weathered hands, stood with a folded piece of paper in his grasp. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, the foreman replied. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. Rochelle rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. Breathe, she whispered, her voice soft but firm. The paper was passed to the bailiff, then to the judge. A hush fell over the room so deep that even the faint creak of the wood benches seemed loud. The judge unfolded the note, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. In the case of the state versus Karen Whitfield. Karen's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the defense table. On the charge of harassment, we find the defendant guilty. A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. Karen shut her eyes tight, her lips trembling. On the charge of arson, the judge paused deliberately, his gaze sweeping across the silent room. We find the defendant guilty. The silence shattered into gasps. A neighbor in the back audibly exclaimed, "Finally!" Another shook his head in disbelief. Karen shot up from her chair, her face twisted with rage. "This is a sham. A setup. You're all against me because I wouldn't let him lower the standards of our neighborhood." The judge's gavel struck hard. "Ms. Whitfield, you will sit down at once." But Karen's voice rose higher, hysteria dripping from every word. "You'll regret this. All of you. That house was an eyesore, and he didn't belong here. I was protecting us." Her words echoed, ugly and raw, bouncing off the courtroom walls. It was the mask torn away completely, no pretense, no charm, just the truth of her bitterness spilling out for everyone to see. The judge's voice cut through a rant, stern and unyielding. "Enough. The jury has spoken. Sentencing will follow, but this court finds you guilty as charged. Officers," he gestured toward the bailiffs, "remove her from this courtroom." 2 uniformed officers moved swiftly. Karen struggled, her heels scraping against the floor as she cried out, "No! You can't do this to me. I built that neighborhood. It was mine." The doors closed behind her, muffling her screams. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Marcus sat still, his eyes fixed on the space where Karen had stood. For the first time in months, the weight pressing on his chest lifted. He felt the sting of tears in his eyes but didn't let them fall. Rochelle gave his arm a firm squeeze. "You won," she said quietly. But Marcus knew it wasn't just a legal victory. It was something deeper. Karen had tried to erase him, to burn him out of existence. Yet here he sat, scarred, yes, but unbroken. For the first time since the fire, Marcus allowed himself to breathe freely. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. The trial was over, but its echoes lingered in every corner of the neighborhood. Word spread fast. Karen Whitfield, the self-proclaimed guardian of the HOA, had been convicted of harassment and arson. For years she had sat at the head of the boardroom table, dictating rules, fining neighbors, and bending everyone's will to hers. Now she was gone, her crown of authority shattered in a courtroom, her reputation burned to ashes like the house she destroyed. For Marcus, life didn't immediately return to normal. The scars on his arms still itched from the fire, and some nights he woke up gasping, the smell of smoke haunting his dreams. But when he stood on his property again, this time among the skeletal remains of what had once been his home, he no longer felt defeated. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now came to help. Mr. Alvarez brought over his tools and offered to clear debris. Mrs. Thompson, who had always kept her distance during HOA disputes, showed up with meals. Even children who had once been warned not to play near Marcus's yard now came with flowers, planting them near the foundation stones that remained. The neighborhood had shifted. Without Karen's iron grip, people realized how much fear had dictated their lives. The HOA, once a weapon in her hands, was dissolved in an emergency meeting. A new community committee formed, one built on cooperation instead of control. Marcus watched these changes quietly, often from the sidelines. He wasn't interested in power or revenge. He just wanted peace. But he couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing Karen's empire crumble, not by his hand, but by the weight of her own hate. One evening, Rochelle joined him on the edge of the lot where his new foundation was being poured. The hum of construction filled the air, but for the first time, Marcus felt hope in the sound. "You know," Rochelle said softly, her gaze on the rising frame of the new house, "this place is going to stand as proof. Proof that she didn't win." Marcus nodded, his voice quiet. "She tried to burn me out of here. But look! He gestured to the busy workers, the neighbors chatting nearby, the kids laughing as they chased each other across the lawn. I'm still here. My home's coming back. And she's gone. Rochelle smiled faintly. Sometimes the best justice isn't just in a verdict. It's in rebuilding what they tried to destroy. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the neighborhood, Marcus felt a deep calm settle in his chest. The fire had taken his home, but not his spirit. The trial had tested his resolve, but it had also revealed the truth about Karen, and the truth had set the community free. Karen's name, once whispered in deference, was now spoken only as a warning. Her fall had united the neighborhood in a way her reign of fear never could. And for Marcus, that was victory enough. The past was burned. The future was his to build.